The book is over 400 pages, and I'm not going to read 400 pages unless you guys want to stay here till next week. But for those of you who don't have the book, I want to do a little advertising for myself. By the way, we have Helen Moore here too, a lady who's been trying for years and years and years to get us to do right. We haven't got it quite right yet, but Helen keeps trying. Helen, you want to raise your hand? That's the queen. There are some folks that wrote at the beginning of my book some things about my book and about me. And I asked about 60 people to do this, not expecting that I would get 70 who did it. So I ended up having to, and I was honored to put them all in the front of the book. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but there's some things I would like to share with you. The first testimony that I'm going to share with you was written by a young man who did not write it about the book. He wrote it about me. His name was Dominic Countryman, and I was his teacher. Dominic, of course, you know, I've got kids in the audience. They're not kids anymore. They're in their 60s, who I coached and whom I taught. Dominic is still in his teens, and he was having a lot of trouble. Al Ward, who's the principal of Finney, knows Dominic, and he knows some of the problems that Dominic was having. But Dominic wrote just a short little word when I had my class evaluate me at the semester break in January of 2008. January 2009. Dominic wrote, "Dr. Telford is a great teacher." Now, I still have that little scrap of paper. I still have that little scrawl of paper. I have papers, and those of you who are teachers know how precious these things are to us. I still have scraps of paper that were written to me in 1959, 1960, and that is one of the most recent. Dr. Patricia Dignan, who also tried her best to fix the schools, wrote, "John Telford doesn't wait for justice to happen, he makes it happen." Glenn Dowley, who was my student and teacher at Pershing High School, later became a Rose Bowl star and an All-Pro with the National Football League with the Baltimore Colts, wrote, "Coach Telford was built for speed. He could outrun any of us. He looked like a white secretariat." I guess I was kind of a force. You know, my nickname in high school was Mustang. So, during the racially charged 1960s, he provided wisdom for our lives after sports and pushed us to get college degrees. This compelling story is his proud story, but it is our story too. Reggie Bradford, who's in the audience today, an All-American runner at the University of Michigan, who is now state runner at Pershing for me. Raise your hand, Reggie. I think I saw you somewhere. There he is, over there. Reggie, I won't read everything Reggie wrote, but he wrote some good stuff. It's a long, kind of long. Gary Doyle was a superintendent in Bloomfield Hills. I trained Gary. He was one of my principals when I was when I was deputy superintendent in Rochester. Wrote, "The captivating chapter about Telford's fighter father proves the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If they had made Telford the superintendent in Detroit, any of the several times he offered to do the job," I actually offered sometimes to do it for free, "he would have uncovered the ship," excuse my language, you know, Gary's not mine, "he would have uncovered the ship long before it hit the fan and an emergency financial manager had to be brought in." Dr. Wayne Dyer, who was another protege of mine, I coached him in track in 1958, he was my assistant track coach at Pershing High. Your Erroneous Zones, Pulling Your Own Strings, The Sky's the Limit, all those books. He's got, you know, $100 million now. But he wrote, "Once one of the fastest men on the planet, John Telford remains a fast and indomitable fighter for human rights. His luminous life story is in turn outraged, droll, scandalous, and sexy. Also, his sometimes, you know, it is kind of sexy, but I'm not going to read any of that part. My wife didn't come today, my wife Gina. She's not happy with some of the stuff that's in my book, but it's my life story. I told her, you know, Gina, write your own book. His luminous life story is in turn outraged, droll, scandalous, and sexy. Also, his sometimes self-deprecating and ironic humor never fails to make the discerning reader smile. I'm going to skip through some of these, but there's some things that I really want to share with you. Jeffrey Feiger wrote, John Telford's crusades for social justice have truly inspired mine. His father was a very close friend of mine. We worked together. Aaron Gordon, let's see what Aaron Gordon said. I don't know if anybody remember Colonel Aaron Gordon? You know, he's down south, a great athlete, great scholar, great civil rights fighter, great soldier. He was a decorated soldier, colonel in the United States Army in the Korean War. He wrote, and he was also ran a world record relay at the University of Michigan. He wrote, he was a long distance runner. He came out of Miller High School and was a city champion out of Miller High School. Would have been state champion, but in those days they didn't let us run in the state meet. I saw that as a civil rights problem too. You know, when John Lewis and Eddie Tolan and those guys were just cleaning up in the state meet back in the 20s and 30s, they just decided that maybe Detroit ought to have its own meet, you know, and we didn't get back in until 1962 when I coached George Wesson, won the state quarter-mile championship at Southeastern. That was the civil rights movement, you know, there was some impetus from Martin Luther King to make that happen. But we did not get to run in the state meet in those days. So Aaron Gordon, who would have won the mile run, maybe probably the half mile and the mile run in the state meet, didn't get to run the state meet. He was city champion out of Miller High School. He wrote, yes, I must own up to the fact that a quarter miler named John Telford really did beat me once in a 1,000-yard race. But he was smart enough never to race me again at that distance. Seriously, though, this book is far more than the memoir of an all-American athlete. It is a memoir of an all-American man who, throughout his entire life, has fought for the rights of all Americans. You know, I remember that race. It was a terrible race. I was making a comeback, and the year was 1960, and I was making a comeback to try to get on the Olympic team that year. And I was being coached by Frank McBride at Wayne State. Now, my former coach, David L. Holmes, always used to emphasize my speed. His nephew, by the way, is in the audience. Robert Holmes, you want to raise your hand, Bob? His father is in the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame.
And of course, his grandson is here. Keith is here.
Keith Wonderlich is here too. Yes. So the Holmes family is well represented. You know, he was my second father. You know, he was my hero. He was my everything. I credit him in this book. But he used to train me with speed. Frank McBride was training me with endurance. You know, he was making me run 330 yards in 45 seconds, jog 110, do it again, jog 110, do it again, jog 110, do it again. So he decided I would have to race 1,000 yards, you know, which was 300 yards farther than I had ever raced. And I had a girl in the stand. So I'm saying to myself, now wait a minute, I got to run 1,000 yards against this guy. We went by the half mile, 1 minute 56 seconds, if you know anything about track times. And when I heard him say 155, 156, you know, as I passed that point, at that point, Aaron had about 5 or 10 yards on me. And I caught in the stretch and threw myself across the finish line and went over and threw up in the pole vault pit. And vowed I would never run 1,000 yards again. Tim Gore, is Tim here? He's a policeman, but he said he was going to try to get here. He's on duty. But anyway, he said, this is the astounding story of a high-ranking administrator who retired and then actually came back down to a 100% black inner-city high school to teach. Dr. Telford's students at Finney were positively hypnotized by him. That's because I never shut up. They couldn't talk, they didn't give him a chance, I didn't want to talk. So were other teachers' students when he went in and spoke to them. He pinned his students' work on boards all over his classroom, and he made that classroom their haven. And they needed one. Their kids need a haven. We're not giving it to them. These wild kids would get almost eerily quiet whenever he began to speak. he never had to raise his voice. It was a rare sight to behold. His kids would have killed for him. I hope they wouldn't do that. As he says in the book, he called them his activist army, and that's exactly what they became. When John Telford returned to the school after a full year away to deliver a surprise address at their 2009 commencement, the entire graduating class gave a long and loud standing ovation before he even started to speak. Spencer Haywood, whom I coached in track, the great NBA basketball star, and the first hardship case in the NBA, wrote, Coach Telford has led a life of which legends are made. Anybody feel like buying the book now? You guys ready? Am I making you? Maybe we got something really good here. Ken House, is Kenny or his wife in the audience today? He was my state champion at Finney. Only state champion Finney ever had. State champion back in '64. The amazing story, I won't read that. His wife said something. He said some good stuff though. Walt Jenkins. Walt Jenkins made it. They haven't seen Walt. This exciting book is everything: drama, humor, poetry, romance, juicy scandals, sports challenges, and above all, a lifetime of fighting for justice in inner city schools, suburban boardrooms, and down and dirty in Detroit's dangerous streets. Defending the rights of the downtrodden and disenfranchised, John Telford has done it all. Dr. Jenkins was the principal of Cooley High, also at Northern High. He was also an executive director with me, former Detroit Lion. He and I got into a physical altercation one time, arguing over whether his relay team had been fouled by my relay team. He was coaching at Kettering. But, we shook hands after that. I think he was a little surprised, too, because he's a lot bigger than me. But he was a little surprised. Keith Johnson, Kevin Johnson. Did Kevin make it today? Kevin Johnson, the director at B&H Friendship House. I guess he said he was coming. He said, John Telford made me dare to dream. Now, I was working with him at Wolverine Human Services, and I kept pushing him. I can talk about that because he's not here. But I was pushing him real hard to get his doctorate. He didn't want to do it. But he is now Dr. Kevin Johnson. I was at his doctoral party not too long ago. Stuart Kirschenbaum is here, the former, but in my mind still, the guy that heads up the whole boxing program in Michigan. Where is Stuart? Because I'm having trouble with my eyesight. Is he still here? He was here. Is he back there? Okay. Stuart, what did Stuart say? He said something really nice. John Telford is an icon from the past who is now being rediscovered by the masses. This book is his second coming out party for him to take his rightful place among the giants. That was a very nice accolade. Dan Crickbaum, the Chief Operating Officer for Governor Granholm, said something. He was the NCCJ Director. I'm not going to read that. Tony Merritt is here. Where's Tony? Raise your hand, Tony. He and I were back-to-back at Finney many a time, when everyone else was backing off. Tony was there. Dr. Telford always put his students first, sometimes at the risk of his own safety. He would confront hoodlums who came into the school from outside that even some security guards backed away from. I also saw him save some tough kids that everyone else had given up on. His life story in schools sets a sterling example for all of us to follow. Where's Anthony Neely? Where's Anthony? Anthony's not here. Okay, I can talk about him too. Anyway, he was a press secretary for two Detroit mayors, not Kwame, two other Detroit mayors. He writes a fearless street fighter his entire life. John Telford has written the best memoir on Detroit. You guys hear that? The best memoir on Detroit I've ever read. A delightful and scandalous tale. He explicitly depicts the daily battles for respect and survival in the city's toughest schools and neighborhoods. Tom Nelson wrote something good. Mike Oldham, my kid Mike Oldham, John Telford saved my life. He was a Super Bowl player. Greg Owens called me the Jonathan Kozel of the high school. Greg, by the way, passed at 68 on the 8th of July, and that was just before this book went to press. He was one of my principals at Plymouth and one of my principals in Rochester, who stood by me when, by the way, when the bigots came after me. He was one of the few people that had the courage to do that in Rochester. I'll miss him every single day that remains to me on this earth. Gil Perkins said something good. He called me a rebel and a renegade. I don't know if I'm a renegade, but he called me a rebel, a renegade, and a Renaissance man. I'm wearing my do-rag, so maybe I look a little bit like a renegade, but it keeps the sweat out of my eyes, and I knew I was going to be sweating today. let's see, what else? Mentor of mentors, that's what Commander David Points called me. I haven't seen Dave in the audience today. John Powell, my protege, and a man who should be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He should have been in the Supreme Court long ago. He's a former National Legal Director of the ACLU. He wrote the introduction to this book. I'm going to read a part of that. He also has been an indomitable fighter for civil rights for many and many a year. You know, he's another guy who's getting long in the tooth now. He's in his 60s. But he said, throughout the years, John Telford's achievements in philosophy have had an inspirational impact on my own, as affected most recently when, as a suburban school superintendent, he stood steadfast in the fearsome face of racism. Charlie Primus said, you know, the old community guy and All-American basketball player at Wayne State, Harlem Globetrotter, used to be principal of the youth home. He said, if you care about the future of America's black children, you will memorize parts of this powerful book. Dave Sneed says it was a great book. My wife, who is not here, said, John doesn't hesitate to fight the white and the black establishment when they are about kids. How many teachers, black or white, do you know, whose black and white students, young and old, still call him every day, not only to thank him, but just to come and hang out with him. Carl Wagner, who also couldn't be here tonight, was high school principal when I was a supervisor at Madison, and he was another one who stood by me. His colleague also was here, Scott Johnson, who was another one of the ones, one of the few at one point, you know, who were there in the corner. He said, John Telford's got guts. Al Ward said, John Telford stands for what's right and he's tough. Al Ward is our new athletic director, and we need one bad at the Detroit Public Schools. He's sitting over there. I'm going to read one last. Is Willie Wooten here tonight? Did he read it? Yeah, okay, yeah, all right. Willie wrote, the consummate proponent of civil rights, John Telford is an unforgiving advocate for the underdog. He will face down anyone who wields power wrongfully, but he writes, he lives. And then Willie later said, you know, you sent me first draft of the book. When I saw the last draft of the book, I decided that this is the best book I've read since reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And those are, you know, some words coming from Willie. I may be talking a little bit about some things that we did at Southwestern High School, if I have time. Because Rebecca, how long do we have? How long can I keep this captive audience here?
8 o'clock.
Oh, we got till 8 o'clock? Oh, good. Man, that'll be fun. Okay, all right. Well, let me read what Ray Wright from Detroit and Pontiac. He's an activist and an advocate for youth. This will be the last one I'm going to read, and then I'm going to get into the rest. I'm going to read a poem after that. It's in the book. Ray wrote, Ray, raise your hand. There's Ray, right over there. I have an urgent message for any person who will dare to read every word of A Life on the Run. I think Ray ought to be writing a book. You haven't heard it all. I challenge you not to be intrigued and not to have your spirit moved by this book. John Telford isn't just a brilliant writer. He isn't just a gargantuan educator. He isn't just a former Olympic level athlete, nor only an unrelenting defender of civil rights and children's rights. John Telford is an, can't even say the word, archangel? Really? John Telford is an archangel wielding a shining sword of social justice, single-handedly waging his holy war against the hypocrisy and horror of racism in America, cutting through the excuses in opposition to those who maim, murder, and molest minorities. It sounds like you're talking about Helen Moore here. He protects those among us who are less equipped to defend our God-given right to life and liberty in this so-called greatest country on earth. Dr. John Telford's life story is a testament to his courage under fire and his spiritual and physical prowess, while also retaining his humble humanity. This isn't the story of a big celebrity, or superstar, or self-professed icon. Yes, I am. I am an icon. It's the story of a real hero. Okay, I'll take that, Ray. I accept that. It's also the story of a real man. I love you, Doc. Well, I love you too, Ray. Okay, I now invite, this is written right here, I now invite the righteous readers to read righteously on, in order to learn what these many preceding accolades are all about. Hopefully to become inspired, and also to become righteously angry, righteously enlightened, and perhaps even righteously illuminated. Yes, John Telford, duly designated archangel and wielder of a shining sword of social justice per the hyperbolic last testifier, Ray Wright, quote, because of the oppression of the weak, I will now arise, set the lower, and I will protect them. It's from Psalms. Life on the Run. I dedicate this book to Gina Telford, who's not here. The gorgeous African-Irish American artist who took the precarious step of marrying this old maverick, her chronological elder, by 26 tumultuous years. I also dedicate it to my teammates, alive and dead, and to the teachers, administrators, and other insurgents I worked with and played with, who have toiled intrepidly in the trenches to enlighten the unenlightened and rally the righteous rebels. I dedicate it as well to my students, children, and grandchildren I have lived for, and through whom I will always live. They embody my prayed for future, for an eternally strong and more egalitarian America. Finally, I dedicate it to my mother, Detroit kindergarten teacher Helen Telford, 1907-1998, and to my father, John Scotty Telford, 1902-1987, that Scotland-born